Hello and welcome to Lost in Sci-Fi and Fantasy, and welcome as well to Spooky Month, where we are kicking off Spooky Month with Silent Hill Revelations. Revelation? Revelation, singular. So, yes, the not necessarily super anticipated sequel to the 2006 Silent Hill film. So this film serves as a direct continuation of the 2006 film and also serves as a loose adaptation of the third video game. Because the third video game is actually a direct sequel to the first video game, so they decided that since that was a direct sequel, that the direct sequel to their film would be the third game. Now, I don't know much about the games. I've watched a playthrough of most of the first game. I also own the first game, and I know that the lore and whatnot for Silent Hill is a big old mess. And supposedly, from what I've read, a lot of people's least favorite aspect of Silent Hill is the cult stuff, but they keep leaning into the cult stuff. You know, they had the first game, which was pretty good. The second game, which is considered one of the best horror games, if not one of the best survival horror games ever. And then you have the third game, which is seen as a bit of a decline. It's the first PS2 game. It's when things start to take a bit of a different turn, but it is also a direct sequel and a continuation of the first game, following Harry and his daughter. But yeah, there's that. Then there's the fourth one, which is set primarily in a room. People thought that was kind of interesting, but also not terribly great. And then you start getting into like the Wii games, Shattered Memories, Book of Memories, I think, is also one of them. Homecoming is another one. Origins is another one. It's a whole lot of stuff, and primarily a lot of those are kind of revolving around the cult stuff, and people didn't really like that. What people were kind of hoping for from the Silent Hill series is kind of what I tend to hope for from a lot of different series, in a way, at least some of them, and that is anthologies. Because people tend to, while following a character and their journey over multiple stories is good and fun, for certain genres, especially horror, it's kind of better to do it in an anthology setting, where you're following different people put in similar, but not the same, scenarios. So take, for example, you look at the Saw franchise, you're not necessarily following one character around. You know, it's not one character constantly being put in the same Saw traps over and over again. It hops around. While there are characters that are carried over, it's not necessarily following one person's story, per se. Or you look at the Final Destination series. That is definitely like an anthology situation where you're just following a different group of people, surviving death and then having to continue to survive death, and most of the time failing at it. So horror tends to really thrive from this kind of anthology feeling because it kind of helps take away that sense of security. And it also helps the creators with a lack of reliance on following one set of character stories. So I think that's why people enjoyed the difference between the first Silent Hill and the second Silent Hill, is because it was a completely different guy's story. And Silent Hill for him was a completely different situation, where in the first game it's surrounding this cult and the terrible things that they did and the consequences that they are being served for it. This the second game follows primarily like this one guy, and Silent Hill is kind of his way to come to terms with what he has done. The third game, though, decided to go back and continue the story of the cult, which probably threw some people off. It's kind of like with Halloween. Originally, the Halloween movies were supposed to be an anthology series. They did Halloween Part 1 and Part 2, and then they intended for it to be an anthology series, so that's why Halloween 3 is completely different. It's the one that's all about the masks and shit. But then when that didn't do quite so well, they're like, well, we already kind of started a thing with these first two, so let's kind of go back and do this. I don't know why they would do this with Silent Hill, because honestly, most people really like the second one more than any of the others. That's why when it got a remake, it's the only one so far that's gotten a proper remake. I would like for the first one to get a remake at some point, but we'll see. The second film is also supposed to be getting a live-action depiction. It's going to be called Return to Silent Hill, and it's being made by the same guy that made these live-action films. I'm very curious to see what it's like, and if it's a proper continuation, or like what's going on. Because this film technically leads into a potential like sequel, but it doesn't really go anywhere. And I don't know if we're going to be continuing that storyline or if we're going to be going on a completely different one. Because what they've been saying surrounding the new film is that it's going to be primarily based off of Silent Hill 2. Which technically all of these have been at least partially based off of Silent Hill 2. But in this case, it's going to be like actually Silent Hill 2. I don't know if it's going to have the same characters or not. In fact, I can double check real quick. So it is properly set based off of Silent Hill 2. Now this film, again, is based primarily off of Silent Hill 3. It's a loose adaptation, picking up kind of where the last film left off. Now the last film, we were following Rose and her daughter as they were just kind of wandering through a Silent Hill-ified version of the rest of the world. So they were kind of stuck in this weird parallel dimension thing. At some point in between the films, Rose went and got this token or medallion thing and was able to bring Shannon, I think her name is in this, back to the real world. But she had, since the medallion wasn't complete, she had to stay behind. So in the intervening time, as they were moving around, the cult has come after them at least once, and he had, Harry, her dad, had to kill a guy. He killed a guy, and they've been kind of on the run from the police since. And she has had to change her name. She is now going by Heather, and they've just moved into a new town. Now, she's been having nightmares. The movie actually opens with a nightmare of her going through this amusement park, seeing a dead fish, seeing a mascot turn its head to look at her, and then she books it to a carousel, sees, I think her name's Alyssa, or something like that, the other part of her, and the other part of her warns her, do not go to Silent Hill, don't do this, it would be very bad for you to go to Silent Hill, don't do it, as she burns the people that were surrounding the carousel. And we see the Red Pyramid, also known as Pyramid Head, the name people have given him. Now, he is only in Silent Hill 2, but because of his icon status, he was put into the first one and the second one, and he's been kind of, at least in this film, he's being treated as a guardian of Alyssa. Again, I apologize if I'm saying the wrong name, but I believe it's like Alyssa or something like that. But yeah, so he's, at least for this film, been deemed her guardian, and doesn't really appear again until, like, I don't know, 40 minutes into the film. But she wakes up, and her dad comes in to comfort her, and he's like, oh, this happens every time we move. And she's like, I don't know, it seems a bit different. He's like, nah, it's fine. We'll just, slap a fresh coat of paint and everything will be fine. And then he gets stabbed by a monster in her dream. So then she wakes up again, because it was just a dream. She writes down quickly Silent Hill in her little notebook and sets it off to the side. Then she has breakfast with her dad, gets ready for her school day. We kind of are given some exposition here, but for the most part, it's just kind of, hey, we've been moving around a lot. Hopefully we won't have to do this again, but we'll see. So she goes off to school, and on her way to the bus, she notices a homeless man, and she just stares at him for a good while. He wakes up, starts kind of crawling kind of towards her, and she has a vision of him with no face. She gets scared, almost gets hit by a car, and then a guy approaches her and is like, hey, you need to be a little bit more careful. Are you okay? And she's like, it's fine. And then he asks, like, do I know you? Have I seen you before? And she says no, and leaves. Then at school, there's a painfully cringe moment where she is told to introduce herself, and she does. She's like, I'm Heather, I'm new. The teacher's like, come on, you can give us a little bit more than that. So she fucking snaps. And she says, look, this is my 7th school. I've done this so many times. You guys might as well not even fucking get to know me or anything like that, because, like, I'm probably going to be gone by the time you guys even begin to learn anything about me. So it doesn't fucking matter. And in this case, it really doesn't, because after she leaves, that's the last we see of her at school, really. As she's walking through the school, there's like this weird moment she has where everyone disappears, and then like a creature starts hustling towards her. Then, in a panic, she backs up and backs into, I think his name's Vincent, but I just kept thinking of him as Kit Harington because it's Kit Harington pre Game of Thrones, which I found very funny. But yeah, so she backs into him, and he's the other new kid who, after she gave her little speech, was told to introduce himself. And he's like, I can't follow that up. But yeah, so he asks her out to coffee. She says no, like, what I said in class was what I meant. I don't want to form any connections or anything like that, because I'm likely going to be gone before I can even care. But he's still kind of poking her, being a bit annoying. As she's getting ready to leave school for the day, she notices the man that she bumped into is waiting for her. So she immediately turns around and goes back into the school and calls her dad. She tells her dad, like, hey, there's a guy following me around. Like, he might know something. And her dad's like, okay, don't come straight home. Go to the mall. We'll meet there, and we'll figure something out from there. So she goes to the mall, but as he's getting ready to go, there's like a rustling at his door, and as he goes out the back door, he gets taken. While she's waiting at the mall, she's starting to feel a big old sense of unease as she's starting to see weirder and weirder things, such as, these kids happily eating meat, such as kids at this birthday party, which for a little girl named Heather. And yeah, she starts seeing them as eating like flesh and blood and whatnot, and she starts getting super uncomfortable. Then she snaps out of it a bit, gets up and starts to run away as she sees the guy appears at the mall. So she flees to a cop and is like, hey, but he has like a weird face, so she backs away and goes into a staff-only area, runs through there, is still having these weird visions where she sees like a guy slicing off like chunks of flesh from a dude that's been hung upside down, and she runs her way through this weird pseudo nightmare world and ends up getting cornered by the guy. The guy tells her that he's a private detective. He didn't know who he was hired by until recently. He's been hired by a cult. And he's like, you need to get out of here because things aren't going good. Like, they know where you are because I told them where you are. And, like, they're watching you and whatnot, so you need to go. And she's like, that's what I plan on doing. But, like, where's my dad and whatnot? At that point, he is then attacked by this weird, like, saw blade monster thing and gets his fingers cut off. And she pulls him into the elevator and starts activating the elevator. And the saw blade monster thing attacks them, but then disappears. And then as she's getting out and having him come with her, the saw blade monster reappears and takes him and kills him. She runs away, hides, and then all of a sudden things switch back again. A janitor comes in. She books it and ends up out in a police investigation where they have recovered the body of the detective. And so she's like, very awkward and whatnot. And then she goes home with Kit Harington, or Vincent. And when she gets home, she sees that on the wall, painted in blood, is Return to Silent Hill and the symbol. She goes digging through her dad's stuff, along with Kit Harington, because he heard her scream. And as they're looking through this stuff, the cops show up, and he's like, I thought you said you didn't call the cops. And she's like, I didn't. We need to go now. I need you to drive me. And she takes the medallion thing, puts it in her pocket. They go. And while they're going, she reads the letter from her dad, which is like, hey, everything will be explained in my journals. She reads the journals. And in the journals, there's a breakdown of everything Silent Hill. Now, the thing is, I think that this was supposed to be a way to kind of expand the lore and whatnot, I think. But the funny thing is, he didn't experience this. In the first movie, he just kind of ran around. He heard the horrible tales of what had happened and everything, but he ran around the normal world version of Silent Hill. He didn't experience any of the monsters or anything like that. So why he has a journal filled with this information? No clue. My best guess would be that he has gathered this information based off of doing extensive research on stories that other people who have experienced a Silent Hill experience have done. I think that this is potentially a way to expand the lore a bit, because at the end of the film, he does say, hey, or someone says, hey, there is more than one Silent Hill. So, are you sure it's this one? And there's also mention that it manifests differently for different people, and different things happen. And he even says again at the very end of the film, yeah, sure, things are kind of chill now, but another one will kind of crop up because it's just kind of a manifestation and a place for lost souls. So that's kind of a way I think that they were trying to make it more of a franchise and maybe more anthology based instead of following these characters specifically, even though the end does kind of set up for continuing to follow these characters specifically. Anywho, so as they're on their way, she's reading through the journals, and Vincent's like, we need to stop. I'm tired. We need to stop. You're tired. We need to stop. So they pull over at a motel. They've already kind of crossed the threshold towards Silent Hill. But yeah, so they stay at this motel. She sleeps. She has a bit of a nightmare. But she wakes up and sees that he's still awake. She's like, you haven't slept? And he's like, no. And he the night before had argued, we need to stop. Your dad's right. We need to stop. But she convinced him that they need to continue in the morning. But in the morning, he's like, no, seriously, we need to stop. And then he goes into explaining that he is actually a child of Silent Hill. He's from Silent Hill. And he was sent by the cult to retrieve her. But he doesn't believe that she is really evil, because according to them, the cult believes that she, being part of Alyssa, is evil and must be destroyed. And the only way that they can destroy Alyssa and potentially be free is by getting them together and killing them both. That's the idea, at least. Although their plan kind of shifts near the end of the film, but we'll get there. So she's like, no, we've already been over this. I still need to save my dad. You're a weirdo for being part of the cult and teleporting yourself into the real world to get me. Because he has this big scar on him now that's the symbol. She's like, yeah, you're weird. He ends up getting taken, and she gets knocked out when the hotel rips apart and is brought into the darkness, they call it. He is like, hey, it's because you're getting close to Alyssa, and you're doing this because you're part of her, and as you guys get closer, it's gonna be pretty much this all the time, kind of. But yeah, anyway, he gets taken, she gets knocked out, then she takes the pendant and begins her journey through Silent Hill. She first goes to the church, where she sees the old lady, which is her actual like birth mother. Although the way that they explain things is a bit weird. So the the relationship dynamic is very weird in this world. So that is technically her birth mother because Heather is technically a part of Alyssa. So they are technically one being. So would be her mother. But the way that her mom explains it, and this is like her only fucking appearance in this film, which I find funny. Basically, she explains that because Alyssa like took this part of her most innocent part, the part that could still feel love, and put it into an orphan child, technically Alyssa is kind of her mom, like Hannah's or Heather's mom, but is also like a sister, but also they are like one being. It's weird. But then the alarm sounds off the church, signaling that it's gonna do the weird dark thing. She's told to run. It's safer inside. So she runs into a building. This is kind of where things get a little bit weird, because usually Silent Hill has a clear distinction between the two realities, or at least the two versions of Silent Hill that you explore in the games, and even the last movie had a clear distinction. When the alarm goes off, it switches. And there's a very clear aesthetic difference. There's the gray, ashy, kind of safe world that has some monsters in it, but for the most part, it's not too bad. And then there's the like rusted, in this film, like bloody version that is more dangerous. It has harder, more terrible beings in it. Now, usually there's that clear distinction. In this film, that clear distinction's kind of fucking gone, to be honest. Like, they use the aesthetic every so often of, like, the transition, but otherwise, it's kind of a crapshoot as to whether or not it just kind of looks like a normal room or not. But they do say that they're kind of now permanently stuck in the darkness version of Silent Hill because of her close proximity to Alyssa. But, yeah. She goes through the building, but as she's walking through, she hears some noises, gets creeped the fuck out, and goes a different direction. In this room, it's very confusing. So it's a mannequin room. It's full of mannequins. And as she's going through, she hears weird noises, and she sees, like, in one of these mannequin bags, the mannequin's kind of, like, alive. So she panics, but then she hears, like, crying, and notices a naked woman on a table. And she goes up to the woman, and the woman says, "Help me." And then she says, "Run," as she's, like, overtaken by this thing. Now, how, why, and what, I have no fucking clue. Because this woman turns into a fucking mannequin. And it's a very gruesome scene. It's an oddly gruesome scene with, like, no blood or gore or anything like that. But, like, you can kind of get the feeling that she's becoming plastic. It's just very weird, because it's like, does that happen in Silent Hill? Like, why would that happen in Silent Hill? And my best guess for, like, the how and why is because immediately afterwards she notices another woman, like, in this weird kind of cocoon of saran wrap, and she goes and breaks her free from it, which then awakens this weird mannequin spider creature. My best guess is that this mannequin spider creature bites its victims and it turns them into mannequins, which it can then harvest for further parts, is my guess. At least that's my best interpretation of what the fuck happens in this scene. Because it does, like, jump onto the mannequin that was just made and rips its head off and then, like, pretty much joins it into itself. And then it chases after Heather and Lady. Lady, because we never get her name, as they're trying to escape, she gets taken by the spider monster. So, we barely knew ya. Goodbye, I guess. Anywho, Heather is able to escape. We get a bit of a scene while she's escaping, following her dad and Kit Harington, as his mom pretty much says, hey, I'm going to send you to the asylum to get your brain fixed, because your brain's been corrupted by darkness, just like your grandfather. And the grandfather, Kit Harington, gave Heather the quest to go get the other half of the medallion so that she could actually get her dad out of Silent Hill. But yeah. So she just so happens to pop out of the building at the insane asylum. Hey, what a coincidence. She wanders her way through, finds the file for where his grandfather is staying, or is locked up, and works her way to him. He is a blind man played by Malcolm McDowell, which was very surprising. But yeah, he is like, okay, yeah, he's the one that says, like, hey, there's multiple Silent Hills. Are you sure your dad's in this one? And she's like, yeah, no, he's here. And he's like, okay, yeah, I don't know. And she's like, hey, I need help with this. Can you help me? And he's like, I'm blind. Could you put it in my hand or something? So she puts it in his hand and then takes her gun and puts it against his head in case he does something silly. And he's like, oh, okay, yeah, this is the medallion. Yeah, with half of it was taken by like some woman and a kid to escape. So yeah, but to really get its power, you need both halves. And she's like, yeah, but I need the other half. So like, where's that? And he's like, oh, you already found it. It's inside me. And he like takes it and just starts shoving it in himself, which clears his vision. And he's like, and I can see who you truly are. You're a demon, because he's part of the cult. And he starts attacking her. She takes the gun, shoots him, but he kind of like scurries off and transforms into this big hulking beastie, and like marches at her as she shoots at him. He knocks the gun out of her hand, picks her up, and starts carrying her away. Where, I guess, probably to the cult, kind of where she wanted to go anyway. And she sees the like complete medallion in his chest, reaches in, pulls it out, ends up killing him. He turns to dust. And then she starts going through and hides as Kit Harington, Vincent, is taken through on a gurney. Now, this next scene kind of confuses the hell out of me, as they decided that they were going to do their procedure in a room with the nurse monsters. Now, the nurse monsters got very little play in the first film, as they were primarily just like standing around in one room, and Rose just like slid between them. And I think they had like one minor chase scene as well. In this film, they have a bit more of a role, kind of, but for some reason they decided to do the procedure in the same room as them. And there's also like x-rays behind of like the saw blade monster for some reason. But yeah, so while they're trying to do the procedure, these nurse monsters are activated by sound, and they're just making a bunch of fucking noise. So they work their way over and start attacking these guys, and they end up murdering the two guys. And you're just like, why the fuck did they decide to do it there? Anywho, then they Kit Harington, Vincent, tries to slowly like move around, but each little movement and noise slowly gets the nurse's attention. Then Heather kind of appears, and she's like, how did I save my dad? And he's like, whoa. He's like, I can help you. And she's like, where is he? And he's like, he's under the amusement park in the Sanctum. I can take you there. I can help you out. You just need to let me go. And she goes, fine. So she starts setting to unstrapping him, but of course is making a lot of noise. So the nurses are slowly closing in. And then after they're able to get him free, after a close call, they leave, and then the nurses just kind of freeze again. They leave and work their way to the amusement park. Now, I did forget a scene real quick, so we'll wind back real quick to the asylum. While she was in the asylum after killing the guy, she gets grabbed by many of the patients, and she cries out for someone to help her. And at that moment appears, Pyramid Head / Red Pyramid, and he goes chopping arms off. She slides away, and that's when she sees Kit Harington being brought through. But yeah, so this is kind of showing a bit that he's here as like her guardian and whatnot, which makes things very confusing for like the rest of the film, at least a little bit. But yeah, anyway, when they go into the amusement park, they kind of start semi-recreating. Well, actually, pretty much from this point on, it recreates the dream from the beginning of the film. They sidle up next to like a concession stand where there's a mascot over to one side, but now she's with the Kit Harington guy. There's the Brotherhood is working their way through the amusement park, and he decides to distract them and run off. This kind of works, but she starts kind of panicking because she's like, oh, this is like my dream. There's the dead fish. There's the mascot, but the mascot doesn't move this time. So she's like kind of there panicking. She looks around the corner, sees that there's still some guys roaming around. And then as she goes to look again, oh, there's one right there. She kind of gets grabbed a bit, but she rips the guy's mask off and he dies. Now, the reason that they're wearing the masks, according to Vincent, is that they don't like to breathe the air. They feel that the air will corrupt them. This is supposed to technically just be a belief because, you know, he's breathing it and is technically fine. But they're like, no, it's... They die. They literally start like spitting up black bile and die. And they're like, okay. So she then runs to the carousel, which is being like manually operated by Red Pyramid, which I found very silly in the dream and is still very silly here, because it's trying to say like, oh, you know, he's trapped for some reason and he's doing this for some reason, even though he was free like 10 minutes ago. He's been somehow captured and put into the carousel to manually crank the carousel. Which is also so happens to be the elevator to the inner sanctum. It's very weird. But the people catch fire as they're surrounding the carousel, and she comes face to face with Alyssa. And they talk. Now, the discussion is pretty much that Alyssa's like, hey, you know, I sent you off so that you could live the life I couldn't, etc., etc. But now you fucking squandered it, so fuck you. Heather's like, nah, we're gonna become one again, and they just hug, and there's like this back and forth thing as they're slowly merging together, and then Alyssa burns into flames, and now they are one once again, as the carousel sinks down, and she ends up in the sanctum. So they go, and this is where the cult's plan is fully revealed, that they needed her to conquer Alyssa and reform so that she could become the harbinger of their god, and they could escape Silent Hill that way, I guess. And they're like, all we need is the medallion so that we could get that process started, and we also need your body as an incubator to carry the child. And that's when Hannah / Alyssa takes out the medallion. It's like, I want to see what you truly are. And she goes to grab it, and she then transforms into the Saw Blade monster. Like, ooh, she was the Saw Blade monster the entire time? Like, that was a big twist. While this is going on, Red Pyramid is, like, breaking free of the carousel and working his way over. And the two monsters fight while Hannah and Vincent go to free her dad, who's just kind of been hanging around. They free him as Red Pyramid kills the Saw Blade monster, and they're able to leave. But her dad says, nay, I must stay, because Rose is still here somewhere, and I must go get her. I said that once you were safe, I would come back and get her. So, you take care of my daughter, Vincent, even though you're a cult member, and I really shouldn't trust you. You guys go and figure out how you're gonna survive, I guess. I'm going to vanish in the fog. And he does. So, that's how the film ends. They end up hitchhiking on a truck, a semi, and they fuck off as a prison bus works its way towards Silent Hill. Now, I don't know if this is like a reference to any of the specific like Silent Hill games, but I don't know. So that's where the idea, because as he's leaving, he does say like, hey, it's probably gonna regenerate and still be a shit place because that's just what Silent Hill do. So it's whatever. Because sure, Alyssa's nightmare is over again, so it should be good now. We'll see. But yeah, it does lead to the potential of a movie with Sean Bean looking for Rose, but it's kind of, I guess, presumed that, yeah, he just never came back. Because he literally just disappears into the fog. But yeah, that's how the film ends. Overall, it's a okay film. It has some decent action, some decent-ish gore. The creature designs are pretty cool. I just don't like the kind of inconsistency of the world. I took the Silent Hill aesthetic to mostly be like Rust. Like everything's just super fucking rusty. But this takes it to be a lot more goo. Fleshy goo. So I don't know. I mean, in some cases I think that's still like a Silent Hill thing, is like a lot of fleshy goo. But yeah. Overall, it's okay. The acting was a bit meh. And boy howdy, do Kit Harington and the lead actress's accents keep fucking slipping. Like, you can hear it so many times when Kit Harington is talking that his accent is slipping. He cannot hold an American accent in this film for very long. And near the end of the film, so is the lead actress. So she's from Australia, and her accent starts slipping in as the movie goes. And overall, her acting is a little bit stiff for the most part, but it's not terrible. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say it's nearly as bad as a lot of people have been saying it is, but it's still not very good. If I was to choose between the two Silent Hill films, which one to rewatch, I'd probably rewatch the first one, because the first one's pretty okay. I mean, super fucking dark, but it's pretty okay. But yeah, for Spooky Month, over on RPG Hangout for the challenge, I am planning on playing a bunch of spooky games for Spooky Month, including Resident Evil 2, Silent Hill 2 Remake, so Resident Evil 2 Remake, Silent Hill 2 Remake, and Jurassic World Aftermath. That's it. But anywho, with that said, we're going to go ahead and leave it there. Next on Spooky Month is Aliens. Ooh. But yeah. With that said, thank you guys so much for listening. If you guys enjoyed this, feel free to give it a like, comment, and subscribe if you're listening on YouTube, or feel free to rate, review, and share it with your friends on any podcast catcher of your choice. With that said, once again, thank you guys so much for listening. I will talk to you guys next time. Goodbye.